Rated. Thank you for your time. We're going to change over now to our first interview. Welcome to Ask the Therapist, and it's my honor today to have a wonderful person here that's touched my life directly, Dwight Dunlap. Dwight is a therapist. He's probably helped, no exaggeration, thousands of people, and it's my honor to have him here. Dwight, welcome. How you doing?
Thank you.
Excellent. Dwight, please tell me a little bit about, previously, how long you've been sober, where do you currently work?
I've been sober now, it's been about 28 years.
So 28 years of complete sobriety.
Well, within that period I relapsed as a
Okay.
therapist at Detroit Rescue Mission.
Okay,
But from then, that was in about 83,
okay.
I haven't relapsed since. So it's
So
been
it's
about
fantastic.
20
So since
something.
1983, over 20 years sober.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of people that don't understand sobriety get confused. Are we talking about methadone or Suboxone sober? We're talking about the real kind of sober.
Well, this is what I would call sobriety real type. When I got off of heroin back in the 70s, 80s, they had
Right, methadone, right.
And now they have with the Suboxone. I'm not going to get into politics of that.
Mm-hmm.
But my sobriety came without methadone, or if I was in recovery
So
now.
referring to the real kind of sobriety,
real
not
kind.
using any kind of schedule narcotic
Correct.
to change how we feel or without any kind of substitution.
Correct.
That's remarkable.
Working through your feelings, emotions,
Right.
dealing with life.
That's
life's-
great. So Dwight, where did you spend your formative years? Where did you primarily grow up?
I grew up in the 8 Mile community of Detroit, the old 8 Mile, Royal Oak Township,
Okay.
which was a hotbed in Oakland County for the heroin
Or was it
trade.
really?
Yes, it was.
So was there any point in history that the heroin kind of changed? I've been told by other people that knew a lot about Detroit history that there was the riots at 1967, right?
Yes.
So the riots of 67, was that the Rosa Parks Boulevard type area?
Yes.
So after that, was drug availability changing at all?
Yes, the urban setting Detroit was flooded with drugs.
Okay.
And the precursor back then was what we used to call penny caps.
Okay.
Penny
So
caps
what
of
was a
heroin.
penny cap?
Penny caps was little heroin. It was in a cap. You could get it for 50 cents, $1.
You're kidding
It
me.
was like an introduction, like crack was to cocaine.
That makes sense.
And what would happen, we would have these parties and stuff, and you'd get caps, your friends' peer
Right.
pressure, and you would snort it.
Okay.
And once you snorted, then you became addicted and you started into
The progression.
the mixed jive, the
Right.
skag.
Okay.
That's what we used to call it back
So that's
then.
remarkably cheap for basically
Right.
under $1. You can buy a penny cap of heroin.
You
Would that
could
be
back
strong
then.
enough to get a person high for a few hours?
Yes.
Wow, that's
And it
remarkable.
was a snare. They had, even in Detroit, on Woodward, I can recollect, you could drive in, like soul food places.
Okay.
And you could drive in, you could get neck bones, beans, and a cap of heroin.
You're
It was
kidding me.
just that
They
popular.
had drive-through efficiency
Yes.
with that.
It had fragmented the community. Detroit was a setting back in the 60s, 70s, where it bypassed
Right.
New York, Chicago.
Right.
You could get anything you wanted in Detroit in regard to opium and heroin. And so that just, it flooded the whole community.
So how did that begin to affect your friends and family, this hyper availability of heroin in the community?
Well, it caused a lot of, as I said, fragmentation. Most of the men my age, I'm 66 now,
Okay.
hooked on heroin, you were not there for your wife.
Wow.
So there you had the single parent family. The males, the mother spoiled the males, because she couldn't be a father.
Right.
The father was not on
Right.
dope and stuff. So that caused a lot of dissension in the community.
Right, because the fathers are emotionally unavailable.
That's
And
true.
that's the best
Yeah,
case scenario, and probably not even physically available if
Yeah.
they're being incarcerated or if
Yes.
they're addicted. And so mom has to wear two roles.
Two
She has to
roles.
wear the hat of the father,
Right.
and also earning and making the money and paying the
Right.
rent, and on top of that also being a mother at the same time.
Right,
It must have been very overwhelming for many of the women in the community.
It was. It was Big Mama in the African American community, and Hispanic probably was the same. Big Mama controlled. She was the matriarch.
Okay.
And that was mother, grandmother.
Right.
Most of the males, us males, we were hooked on the drug.
Right.
It presented a problem for me when I got in recovery.
Okay.
Because then you come back and then you try to reorient into the family system.
Right.
But you've
Your role's
lost your
been
credibility.
taken and lost your credibility.
So we had a generation pushing on into the 80s of young African American males that were angry.
Yeah.
A lot of rage
Right.
and stuff. And then the father, he was like defranchised. You know, he's out of the picture. So it was a dilemma.
Absolutely.
And it still is.
When did you recognize that the heroin was a problem for you personally? When did you recognize
me,
you actually had a withdrawal or a tolerance to it?
Okay, for me, and I advocate, I've been doing that for the last 25 years, drugs and heroin is an equal opportunity destroyer. Now let me clarify that.
Sure.
Because see, I had a brother, and he wouldn't mind now me even sharing. He's in recovery.
Great.
He IV'd, he used mixed jive, and we used to have the boxing glove hands, we used to call it. That was SCAG,
Right.
where they cut it
The
with
low quality
quinine.
heroin, would call
Right.
it all kind of damage would occur to the small blood vessels in the hands and arms and all
Very
that.
demoralizing.
Yeah.
Me being a basketball player,
Uh-huh.
I was an athlete. I didn't start using drugs until I got at UAD.
Really?
And I did it sneaky. It was
Okay.
a clique.
Right.
It was a clique of us, a group. With
So
the
you're
penny
attending
cap.
college and you're supposed to be the healthy
My
athlete.
senior year.
Yeah.
A lot had happened. I had lost a grandfather.
Okay.
My father was more alcoholic. I didn't have a mentor, even though Coach Callahan, who recruited me,
Right.
was a father figure. But I got caught up in the peer
Yeah.
pressure, and I can see that now with the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
The peer pressure to achieve,
Right.
being the hero. And when you experimented, I experimented with cannabis, and then that led to a crowd.
Right.
And then with the penny caps and the heroin.
Right.
I kept it hidden,
Okay.
and then the withdrawal.
Right.
You see.
So when you first used heroin, did anyone kind of warn you and say, hey, by the way, when you take this drug, the withdrawals are really bad and this drug can actually kill you?
No. I fell into the dilemma like a lot of the kids now. You can snort it and you won't get hooked.
Right.
Versus IV with the needle. But
Absolutely.
the withdrawal is just the same.
Yep.
Once you're hooked, then the physical withdrawal, as they say, the monkey.
And this is the problem that we're dealing with all the time now, is that so many people begin using heroin in the beginning by snorting it, not by injecting it. And if I had $1 for every young person that told me they were never going to shoot up heroin, just snort it, I have millions of dollars. And that's a really good point.
Yes.
So once you have that dilemma, we move on to using heroin IV. How about the effects on your body, on your mind, on your spirit? How did that change everything?
It
Self-esteem?
takes all of you.
Okay.
Totally. My body, it's every cell, every fiber within you craves that drug.
Okay.
It works you.
Right.
It's no fun getting high anymore. It's
Right.
work. And it's like crack was. Now, you can never attain, you get the high, but
Right.
then you're thinking about how I'm gonna get the next one, so you're always on the go.
So in the beginning, you're paying someone to get high, but once you have a tolerance and withdrawal, you're paying someone not to be sick.
You're paying not to be sick.
So the focus is going to be avoiding withdrawals.
Withdrawing the physical withdrawal, but then it's a mental too.
Right. So what kinds of services and help were you offered once you had the heroin problem? Was there a place you can go to get help? What kinds of inpatient treatment centers were available in that period of time?
It wasn't for me. Number one, my pride wouldn't let me. I cold turkey.
Oh, really?
I cold turkey.
Wow. So you stopped on your own with no
well,
medical
that was
help.
in the time when they were having when Detroit it was a lot of murders and stuff, the drug wars.
Okay.
And I had lost some close friends.
So fighting for territory and fighting for turf?
And I had gotten angry and I said enough is enough. And then I literally cold turkeyed heroin.
Yeah, wow.
4 days. I was sick.
What did that feel like?
It's undescribable. You're sick. It's like you got the flu 1,000 times.
Right, right.
Flu 1,000 times. But if you don't have any co-occurring disorders, such as heart, you can come out.
Right.
You come out.
Yeah, that's still very tough. We talk about withdrawals and addiction. And so if a person's hooked on heroin or Vicodin or Oxycontin, if they run out of that drug, they're going to wish they were dead, but they're not going to die. People that abuse Xanax and Valium and drink alcohol every day, when they go through withdrawals, they can actually have a seizure and die. And so those withdrawals can be lethal.
Yes, and one other point I would like to make in regard to heroin, I cold turkey and I thought that was it.
Right.
But see, it's what we call secondary withdrawal. It's the ritual.
Right.
That was the hardest.
The
part.
lifestyle, the ritual,
and
the post-acute withdrawal symptoms as well.
Right, right. That's what we advocate, and especially with our young population now. Heroin fragments the family, the community, everybody involved with that person. And sometimes we try to manipulate our loved ones into just stop using everything, it's going to be all right.
Right.
That's not true.
That's a very good point.
That's not true.
Yeah, because abstinence is not recovery.
No, it's
abstinence
not.
means you're not using the drug.
Yes.
And if you were a drunken horse thief and you stopped using alcohol, you'd be a sober horse thief. And that's progression. That's a good thing, but that's not a gold medal. Recovery is an active change in attitudes, ideas, and behaviors. The change is global, and the change is also a spiritual change as well.
Yes.
So how do you eventually get sober from alcohol and heroin?
Through self-help.
Okay. Did you attend NA and AA meetings?
I went through NA. NA helped me, and AA. That
Fantastic.
helped me.
So you used both programs?
I used both. I fought it for 2 years, but then, you know, I was at the verge where I was in relapse mentally.
Right.
My biggest advocate for me was my spirituality.
Nice.
My spirituality, I had a good support where I could deal with the guilt, the shame, through the church, through the community.
Right.
I also was able to get men, very supportive men around me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You have to have a support system.
Yeah, so you can't do this on your own.
You
What you're saying is that you need a team of people,
and I would
advocates
like
and allies.
Right, with a lot of young ones, because I've dealt with young kids, and they're a lot of times they withdraw because they hear NAAA. That's good,
right?
But that's not the only avenue.
Yeah, that's
but
a very
you got to
good point.
have support.
Yeah. And especially with young people, we always say, prove your method. If a person comes to me and says, I don't want to use heroin anymore, and they got tears in their eyes, I'm going to assume the person is telling me the truth. There's no reason to lie to me. I'm not a probation officer, I'm not a judge. But if you say, well, what's your method going to be to stay sober? And they look at you and say willpower, I'm not feeling comfortable with willpower as a method. I wish that willpower was the only issue. If I just use my willpower and sit in this chair and don't think about heroin, it'll go away. But it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't.
It's much more powerful than that.
You have to replace the void.
Yes.
A vacuum.
Right.
You got to replace that.
Absolutely.
Either with
true.
the drug or what we call recovery.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how do you get involved with actually working in the field of helping and healing people, the therapy field? How do you make the switch into that?
It was a calling for me. My goal, when I had gotten back in recovery, I went to Wayne State.
Oh,
I wanted to be an occupational therapist, psychiatric, OT.
Right.
God put me down at Cass Quarter, Detroit Rescue Mission.
Yeah.
That was the spiritual awakening that I needed.
Okay.
It was a humbling experience. I worked with prostitutes, a lot of people on Skid Row.
Right.
And there I got my training.
Okay.
I got the training that I can empathize with Raj.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to feel sorry for Raj.
Right.
And I also got my training as far as how devastating this drug was, with the prostitution, with the gangs, with the individual, with the family.
Yeah.
So that's where I got my calling. A very significant person, he's probably dead now, Reverend Dawes. He pushed me, he motivated me. I had some good motivators.
Yeah.
And it was at Detroit Rescue Mission.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And then I went to Pontiac Turning Point with Vicki Nowak back in '82.
Oh, really? Back then?
Yes, that's when we started, and it's ironic. Me and Rick McFarlane are there at Turning Point, and Paul Farrell. right
And
now.
tell me about Turning Point. What do you guys actually do at Turning Point? How do you help people there, Turning Point in Pontiac?
Turning Point is unique, and it's a change for me because we're dealing with a lot of men
Okay.
that have been incarcerated,
Right.
and coming out at incarcerated, and recidivism with that.
Absolutely.
And it's more, they know, and most heroin addicts or addicts, they're their best therapists.
Right.
But the thing is, how do you inspire? And we try to inspire these men.
That's a very
You
good
know,
point.
We try to
We talk
inspire.
about addiction to get a person to change. It's nice to know about addiction and study addiction. It's more important to study change. For a person to change, they must have hope and a method. You got to have hope and a method to change. I'll give you an example of this. The person that's on Skid Row, that's lost absolutely everything, we can assume one thing about that person: they've had a lot of pain in their life, right? They've had so much pain. Their mom, their dad, their girlfriend, everyone has given up on him. And so if pain got people to stop using drugs and alcohol, we'd have pain centers where we just gave you a whole bunch of pain. That's not how it works. You got to have courage and you got to have a method.
Yes.
And you got to have hope.
You have to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you worked at a Turning Point for a period of time, and you're back there today.
Yes.
So what's the difference that you see in the current heroin addict population versus in the 70s and the early 80s?
This, I tried to preach, and excuse it for a better term, but I tried to preach with drugs, it's a pattern.
Okay.
The 60s, the 70s were mainly African Americans. We're talking about the heroin.
Right.
Today,
Disproportionately was in minority communities at that time.
And today it has flipped.
Right.
You have what we call the Gratiot Express.
Okay.
Young white kids from Mount Clemens all the way down to Detroit, taking that Simpta, get off at 8 Mile, heroin addicts.
That's amazing.
Oakland County, Flint, 75. So it has flip-flopped
Right.
the young Caucasian whites.
Okay. So more a suburbanite population.
Yes, why? Because they had the money.
Right. That's true.
And then you have the technology with the rap, and I'm not down in the rap media and stuff, but all that.
It promotes the
ties in.
culture, though.
It's the culture.
We talk about, I think in the old days, in the 70s and 80s, were prescription drugs like Oxycontin and Opana and fentanyl and morphine, were those pills actually available in the inner city back those days? Were they kind of rare?
They were rare.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
So the person that got into heroin addiction was not going to be using pain pills first.
No,
Yeah.
not like now. And that's that.
Yeah.
The pain pills are like what the penny capsule was.
Absolutely. That's the
Back
introduction,
then,
right?
so,
And
yeah.
so now, I understand why a person in the inner city will sell drugs to have a better lifestyle. I'm not saying it's right, but I understand that if you eat government cheese, have a bad place to live, I can understand the motivation to sell drugs to get a better lifestyle. I don't understand why people that have medical degrees will actively promote and push narcotic drugs, Schedule II drugs like morphine, Opana, and Oxycontin, because they're already wealthy, they've sworn an oath to do no harm, they violate their oath, they get people addicted, and they want to have just one more Rolls Royce in the driveway. I don't understand that, and that's pure greed.
It's greed.
Absolutely.
It's greed.
So how do we help these people that are dealing with heroin addiction now? What are some of the methods that we can do to get somebody motivated to stop? Because some of the young people that I meet with will tell me this is going to be my lot in life. I'm never going to get off this stuff. This is what I am. I'm a heroin addict. This is what I'm always going to be.
What you're doing is
Okay.
very important. Educating the community. The Clarkston, Oakland County community. I saw this 10 years ago when I was working at Insight.
Okay.
It was a Kroger's on Dixie Highway and White Lake Road. And I saw these young kids. I'd work afternoons, I'd get off of work, and I knew they were addicts. And they would scope and watch the people going into the store.
Right.
Within a year, they closed that store.
You're kidding.
They were robbing, they were stealing.
Desperation.
And I would tell some of the parents, hey, no, they're not on that.
Right.
Education is so important.
Absolutely.
You're not a failure, you're not the cause, but you have to look at your child or your kids, look at their behavior.
Absolutely.
A drastic change in behavior.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
that's a good
remarkable. For the first time in American history, we have more people that are dying from prescription drug overdoses than all illegal drugs combined. And that's the proof about the overprescribing. In 1997, they changed the rules. They can now basically go on TV and promote any kind of prescription drug that they want. And so there's no checks and balances on these doctors. If you use Oxycontin, if you use Opana, if you use fentanyl, if you use morphine, and you get it from a physician, and you run out and you have withdrawals, the doctor will say to you, you didn't take it correctly. In fact, the DSM-5, which is the book of all mental health diagnosis, so if you had to come to someone for a mental health evaluation, they go through the DSM-5 book and say, oh, you have anxiety disorder, oh, you have depression. So in the old days, to have drug dependency, right, opioid drug dependency, all it required was withdrawal and tolerance. The book has been changed completely. Now the book says if the withdrawal and tolerance occur while under the care of a doctor, it does not qualify for addiction. And that's remarkable. Can you imagine if the qualifications for rape were changed? You go to the doctor's office, somebody rapes your daughter, and they say, oh, by the way, you can't charge them with rape because that definition doesn't apply in a doctor's office. When a person's got a runny nose and they're puking up everywhere, and that came from a doctor, yeah, that doctor gave them the addiction, and it's important to talk about that, but they've covered themselves by changing that book. And that's really disheartening.
Yes, and we enable, the system enables.
Yes.
It's a lot of greed.
Yeah.
We wait until it becomes a crisis, and I think personally it's almost too late. These kids are dying.
Yes.
These kids are hurting. They need, it's not so much beating them over the head.
Right.
They need some empathy, understanding. We have to spend time talking. We used to have family dinners.
Right.
I gotta work, you gotta work. We know the cost of living. So it's like a vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
But it comes to a point where we have to say enough is enough. Let's go back to some basics. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Basic family dinner. It doesn't have to be as extreme as it was.
Right.
But we gotta communicate with these kids.
It's absolutely
Cell
true.
phones.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much that has contributed.
Imagine in America right now, we have about 2.2 million people in jail or in prison. That's more than any other country in the world. That's more than China and India combined. That's more than South Africa per capita. And 70% of the people that are in jail or in prison right now are diagnosed alcoholics and addicts. And I promise you this, if you go to Oakland County Jail with a drug problem or an alcohol problem, you get no therapy, you get no help, you get no assistance. And so when people keep coming back again, over and over again, you almost want to think there's a possibility there's an incentive to not have anybody change. And so it's really interesting. The only mental health diagnosis that's criminalized is addiction and alcoholism. For example, I can have depression at home, you can't arrest me. I can have anxiety at home, you can't arrest me. I can have attention deficit disorder at home, you cannot arrest me. But the active symptoms of addiction and alcoholism, and we're talking about DUIs, MIPs, domestic violence, possession charges, stealing things out of Myers to pay for your heroin habit, those symptoms are criminalized. And so we got to begin looking at, does anyone actually believe that we can arrest our way out of this problem? Because if you do, please let me know. If we were to arrest every alcoholic, every addict, every drug dealer, would this problem go away? Well, the answer is no. So then why is 100% of all the confiscated money from drug dealers go back into the police and the criminal justice system? Why isn't half of that being given to treatment centers and helping people?
Yes, and that's the issue.
Right, absolutely.
And that's where the courage comes on our part, like what you're doing. And for us pulling our head out of the sand and saying, this is the problem, what are we gonna do about it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've known Dwight for many years. He's probably responsible for helping get sober hundreds of people. He's been a voice, he's been a leader, he's been an inspiration to me, myself, and it's a real honor to have him here today. We're going to go on to our first question from our media source, and our first question is going to be about, talking about addiction, and we're going to talk about So Dwight, in your opinion, people are faced with access to all kinds of illegal drugs, and lots of young people are prone to peer pressure. What can we do to prevent young people from using drugs in the very beginning?
Educate.
Okay.
And those of us like myself back in the 60s, because we do have a population of addicts that are in recovery, we have to come out the closet.
Break the stigma.
That's right.
Yes.
So we have to come out the closet, explain the dangers. Not so much beating our kids over the head. Don't do this, don't do that,
Right.
because we have to be cognizant. Look at the schools.
Yeah.
From middle school on, the pills. We even start them off with what? ADH, so you take Ritalin.
Yeah.
So we got a culture of pill taking.
10% of the high school
So we have
population
to-
is taking Adderall and
That's
those
true.
kinds of drugs. Only
Bipolar,
3% actually have ADHD or ADD.
Right. So we have to educate these kids.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a better way to deal with this. Talking. We used to have sports. They have sports now, but the coach can't do what he did then.
Right. Right.
It's more education, more compassion, empathy.
Yep, and communication is very important
Yes,
too.
with the
Families
kid.
have to keep communication wide open. If your daughter or your son comes to you and says, so and so offered me a Vicodin, so and so offered me some cough syrup, there should be no consequences to come to you with the truth. Communication has to be open and dialogue has to be open. And going in there and talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol being bad is not unreasonable.
gonna get it.
The longer you can delay a person from using drugs or alcohol, the better the odds are going to be they're never going to become an alcoholic or an addict. In fact, if you can get a person to never abuse drugs or alcohol till the age of 21, the odds of them having an addiction in their life are less than 0.1%. Our job is to delay usage as long as possible.
Yes.
Right.
And then NAAA, self-help, leave it around the house. You don't have to give it directly. It's other ways, you know, leave pamphlets, especially for adolescents. NA has a good pamphlet, working the program for adolescents.
Right.
Leave the things like that around.
Those are very good points.
You see.
So another question for you, Dwight. What actually works? If a person has a heroin addiction or has an addiction to other kinds of drugs, where should they go to get help, in your opinion? If a person came to their mother or father and said, you know what, Dad, I really do have this problem. What's the next step?
I would suggest, and it's inexpensive, NA or AA, or I don't know if they still have rational recovery.
Yeah, still do.
And from there, they can network
Uh-huh.
to outpatient. Outpatient is a good avenue
Right.
to start, you know, as an intervention versus directly into rehab, because that can be frightening to a lot of
Absolutely.
people.
So the beginning, we recommend a person that gets help in any kind of format that they want. It can be going to an AA meeting, it can be going to an NA meeting, you can see an outpatient therapist on a first-time basis. Hey, I think I might have a problem. But with regards to the heroin addiction and the Xanax addiction that's very prevalent, once you recognize that you have real withdrawals to those drugs and have a tolerance to those drugs, inpatient is the best course of action. When a person is actively shooting heroin, you can't come to me and say, I got really high self-esteem and high self-confidence, I'm going to stop this on my own. That's incredibly rare. And so you got to go inpatient to get help.
Yes. And Raj, that's where your specialty, and that's what I was saying, outpatient. If you have a loved one, a son or a daughter, then an intervention specialist.
Right. Absolutely.
That works.
Yeah, and tying into the intervention concept, what's really sad is that so many people will say that a person has to reach their bottom to get help. Now, that's probably okay with a marijuana smoking person. You can say, you know, let's wait for them to get to their bottom. But, you know, quite honestly, that's not effective for other drugs, especially heroin. We don't have the luxury to wait for someone to reach their bottom on heroin, because most of the time that bottom's going to be actually an overdose death. And so when you have a person that says, well, they're not ready to get sober, I got to be honest, every person that I see for an intervention, the first thing they say, I'm not stopping using and I'm not going to rehab. Wow, that person's not ready to get clean. So if that was the method, if you had to say, okay, now you got to go back home until you decide that you've had enough, we don't have that luxury. So our job, when a person is abusing drugs or alcohol, our job is to make their using as miserable as possible and their ability to stay sober as easy as possible. That's how we shift their behavior. That's how we create the change. So, Dwight, it's an honor to have you here. You're an inspiration and mentor to me. God bless you in all your work.
Thank you, and you too. Okay.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope this was helpful and I hope this made sense. Only you can make a difference. Remember, the meaning of life is very simple. You are born, you try to make yourself relevant, and then you die. Go out and make yourself relevant. Fortune favors the bold.